Think we can go ahead and get started now. My name is John Brown, and I want to welcome you to this special event with the Tennessee Holocaust Commission. And it is my great honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Mr. Pinchas Gunter. Mr. Gunter was born in a well-established family in Łódź, Poland, when he was 7 years old when World War II erupted. He and his entire family fled to what they thought was safety at Warsaw after his father had been brutally beaten by Nazis. Pinchas and his family were incarcerated in the Warsaw Ghetto for 3.5 years until April 1943. The family was then deported to Majdanek death camp. Pinchas was sent to a work camp where people were beaten, shot, or worked to death. He then passed through several other concentration camps, including Buchenwald, and worked at loading and unloading enormous weights of iron and other slave work. Towards the end of the war, he was forced on a death march from Germany to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. He was liberated by the Russians on the 8th of May, 1945, under the auspices of the UNRRA, was taken to Berlin with other children for rehabilitation. After spending many years in South Africa, he immigrated to Canada, where he now resides. So with that, I want to hand the floor over to Mr. Gunter. We thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to have to be able to talk to you people, and I wish you everything of the best. And I'm going to try and give you a synopsis of some of my experiences during the Second World War. I was born in a city which I have to explain to you the demographics because they are important for what I'm going to tell you later on. And that is that Łódź, spelled L-O-D-Z, because spelling in Polish is quite complicated. And it was the second largest city in Poland. The capital, of course, was Warsaw, and it had at the time 750,000 approximately Polish citizens living in the city of Łódź, of which 100,000 were left over from the time where Poland was occupied by the Prussian, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian empires. There was no Germany. It only later on, Germany became Germany later on. So these 100,000 people were Polish citizens, but they originated from all these different German-speaking countries, and they were very much involved in the textile industry, which they, I believe, to the best of my knowledge, they were actually the ones who started it, and it was very important part of, a lot of them owned some of the big factories in which a lot of the Jewish people that lived there were employed. There were 250,000 Jewish people living at the time, approximately. All these figures are approximate. And there were the rest of them were mainly Catholics. And because Poland is very much a Catholic country. I was born in a very religious community, a Hasidic community, and my father was a winemaker. My grandfather was a winemaker. We lived in Poland according to my grandfather, who had a genealogical scroll, which he used to take sometimes and show it to us, that we were there at least for over 400 years. And today I still have records which were given to me after the war. Of course, I found them after the war. And my latest records that I've got is that we were, my great-great-great-grandfather, Leib Guter, was actually born in 1700 and something. I only could go that far. Before that, a lot of the records have been destroyed. And we had a reasonably good life because we were winemakers. We were making wine not only for Jews, but we were making wine for the whole population of Poland. We had people working for us in most big cities, and we were apparently, according to exactly what I've been told, because don't forget, I was a child, so I can only tell you hearsay. So hearsay was that we were the second largest, you know, people that made wine in Poland and whiskey and others. And we had concessions from Austria and other countries like Italy and Hungary and Palestine. That time, according to my grandfather, we used to import the musk, the actual wine, and then we used to make it wines. And we were quite famous. Our firm was called Złote Grono, golden grape. That's what it was called in Polish. What Złote Grono? Złoto is gold, and grape is golden grape. And as I told you, there was anti-Semitism in Poland. There were about 3.5 million approximate Jews living in Poland, all Polish citizens, and from 1935 particularly, they didn't really want us there. And very often I used to play with Christian boys and girls and others, and they would shout to me, Żydy do Palestini. They got it from their parents, and it means Jews go to Palestine. Why they told us to go to Palestine? Obviously, because we were from the Old Testament and they knew that's where we originated. So they want us to go back to Palestine. All these Jews that lived in Poland. If you go to Poland today, you have a museum which tells you the story of the Jews of Poland that were there for over a thousand years. But anyway, let me give you an explanation. Let me give you a picture of um, of one thing that I experienced when I was a child. I was about 5 years old, and this was in the 1930s, round about 19. I can't remember. I mean, I was born 1932, so it was around about 1937 maybe. I had double pneumonia, and in those days, pneumonia was very dangerous because there were no antibiotics. And the doctor that used to treat us was Dr. Hirschwinkel. I even remember his name. And his name, and he was, I don't think he was Jewish. I think he was actually German. Oh, his origins were from Vienna. And his name was Hirschwinkel, which is a German name. And he somehow, after all these treatments, they were giving me all kinds of things, Chinese glass on my back and my father's blood and all kinds of things. It didn't work, and I was getting worse and worse. He managed to get sulfur drugs. They were the precursor of antibiotics. And he gave me those tablets, and I started getting better. When I got very much better, he decided that it was the right thing to do is to send me to the mountains. Poland is a flat country. It's only got one range of mountains called the Tatra Mountains. And at that time, it was the border between Czechoslovakia and Poland. And it was a place called Shavnica. People used to go there to drink the special waters and the air. And I went to live with the mountain people, Gurale, in tents. And because I had a grandfather, my maternal grandfather was a farmer, I was very familiar with animals. And we lived in tents and huts together with the animals. And I loved that because I didn't have to study and I didn't have to say my prayers every day. I could run around and be a little boy and try and get better. So there was a big, beautiful park in Shavnica, and there was a bandstand. And on Sundays, the different orchestras from the army, from the police, from the fire brigade, from all the different things, they used to come and play concerts. And I used to run down to listen to them. I was very, very musically inclined. I loved music always. There was no musicians in my family. I was the only one who actually loved music. And on the way back, when the concert was finished, I used to go past the big, beautiful church, halfway between the mountain where I lived and Shavnitsa, the park. And I would stand outside. As a Jewish boy, I couldn't go into the church. They wouldn't allow me to go in, and listen to the choir, to the organ, and being completely kind of immersed in this wonderful music. I didn't know if it was Bach or Beethoven or Mozart or whatever, but I just loved it. One day, I was so immensely involved with the music that I forgot myself. I didn't go inside the church, but I went towards the church and I knelt like in prayer on the first step. And suddenly somebody started hitting me. And then I looked back and I saw an old man, about, well, what I was regarded as an old man, maybe 50s or something like that. And he chased me away and he said, "How dare you contaminated our Holy Mother's earth?" Standing outside the church, and he chased me away, hit me, and he chased me away. And I still remember what this man looked like. And I've never forgotten it because it was something that in Łódź I didn't experience it. I experienced occasionally Christian boys playing with me and pulling at my payers. I had, I was blonde and blue-eyed, but they used to pull my payers because, Jidid or Palestinian Jews go to Palestine, but nothing specific. And this is the first time I came into contact with anti-Semitism, which after, by that time I was fluent in Yiddish and in Polish, and I used to read the newspapers, and the newspapers were full of political anti-Semitism, and things were not going so well, including for my father, who had to, 6 months before the end of the year, he had to try and get permission to produce wine in Poland because he had to get renewal of his license, wine license, or whatever it was at the time. And he had to start working because it was so difficult to get it. Anyway, on the 1st of September 1939, the Germans, or call them the Nazis, decided to attack Poland for no rhyme, no reason. And within a week or 10 days, and I don't exactly remember how long it was, they arrived in Łódź. They occupied Łódź very quickly. And immediately they started laws against the Jews. So um, don't forget that uh, uh, there were 100,000 German-speaking, or originally from German-speaking countries, living in Łódź as Polish citizens. They were all, and most of them were genuine Polish citizens. But amongst them, there were some spies, and they prepared for the security services, who came very quickly after the army occupied Łódź, with lists of notables. And the notables were all kinds of notables. They weren't Jewish notables. They were priests and bishops and people that worked for the government, the mayors, and Poland had the nobility, and anybody that would give them any problems later on when they occupied the whole of Poland, they wanted to know who they were. And this was called the fifth column. A fifth column was, these were spies. And these weren't all German-speaking people. These were only some of them. But they created havoc. The security service went around and they started arresting these people who were on their lists. My grandfather, who was a head of an NGO, and where they used to a seminary where they used to teach people to become rabbis. He was on one of the lists. They must have got it from the Jewish Community Council, because there was always in every big city there was a council of Jews that ran the Jewish affairs, and they came to arrest him. We lived in Zachonia 54, in the center of town, opposite a factory that made textiles, and we had two little bedrooms, two little apartments. I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear today because I was quite upset by a lot of the news that happened today, including the death of a very wonderful Pope. So uh, we had these two little apartments, and they were both individual, but there was my parents looked after my paternal grandfather and his wife, because he had lost his first, my grandmother died in 1933 or something like that, and he remarried after a year. That is the way Jewish people, they don't allow people to be widows without anybody, to be alone. So he married a widow, and we used to call her Auntie Granny, Ciocia Babcia in Polish. And there was an interleading door between my parents' bedroom and their bedroom. And but there were individual entrances to the little apartments. Each one was a small apartment. There was a ring at the door, and suddenly my father went across, because my grandfather had just had an operation before the war started on his kidneys, and he was 78 years old. He was very sick. So he opened the door, and two black uniformed uh, soldiers, what I didn't know at the time who was SS, who was Gestapo, with the skull and crossbones on their heads. And they came and asked for my grandfather. My father took them into the bedroom where my grandfather was living, and they said, "What is the matter with him?" So he told them. So they said they decided not to take him. He said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm a son." "What do you do?" "I make wine." "Where do you make wine?" They took him away. They took him away, and they took him down to the cellars in Novomiejska 19, and they actually beat him so badly, and they threw him in a corner. They may have thought that he was dead or whatever. And they went back up from the cellar, and they told the military police, of the German military police, as the truck are going to the front, that the war is still going on, they must come and help themselves to all what is in those cellars. So they took out all the bottles, and then they broke the vats, the vats that were being maturing wine, and they took it away in jerry cans. And by the time they left, it was completely destroyed, something that was in existence there for about 70 or 80 years. And they left. The caretaker, who was a friend of my father, a Catholic man, he saw him taking down, but he didn't see them come up after they left. So he went down to investigate to what happened. He found my father. He wasn't dead, but he was unconscious, badly beaten. And this man risked his life, because after 6, you weren't allowed to walk in the streets. There were patrols, and they would shoot at anybody that walked around. And he took him on his shoulder, and he brought him to our home. Hopefully, thankfully, nothing happened to him or to my father, and because it was very dangerous. And my father, after a week, he recovered, and the same Dr. Hirschwinkel, treated him, and he recovered. After several months in Łódź, things became really terrible. For example, most of these 100,000 ethnic German or speaking German Polish citizens would get little pins with a swastika, and the men used to put it into the lapels, and the women used to put it on a blouse, on a skirt, or whatever they were wearing, on a jacket. And when you walked out in the street and you saw it, a Jew would have to get off the sidewalk and walk in the middle of the road, take off his hat and bow, They took away our bicycles, they took our radios, they took away any jewelry they could find, and they took away furs. They took away just about everything, and a lot of the people were left bereft because they had no work. There was a special, uh, 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 they, for example, they blocked all Jewish people's bank accounts, and you could only go out and get some money once a week. And then you had to get a special permission to go out and buy some things because they only allowed you a certain few hours to go and shop. And it was difficult because the lines were long and things were it became absolutely impossible to exist, and we didn't know. By that time, quite a lot of Jews had left as the Germans were coming in. A lot of the Jewish people. So I believe there were only about 150,000 left over, 150, 160. Exactly, nobody knows the immense amount. And they started talking about a ghetto. The Germans also decided, or the Nazis decided, that they were going to incorporate the province of where Łódź was and Łódź itself into the German Reich, into Germany proper. And they were going to incorporate that. And they changed the name. For example, the province became Warthegau in German, and Łódź became Litzmannstadt, and they created a border, and you had to get special permission to leave. And Jews couldn't travel anymore. You couldn't go to the park. You couldn't use public transport. You couldn't do just about anything. It was really a time of very bad things already right from the beginning. And Jews were being killed. It's not only from the times of where the actual murder started in millions and thousands. It started right from the beginning. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit emotional today. Um, what happened is that my father, because we were blonde and blue-eyed, he decided that we would go to Warsaw, where he had the youngest sister lived in Warsaw because she married a Warsaw individual. And they cut my payers. We got dressed like everybody else was dressed. I had a hat, more or less something like that, and it's called the macheka. And I'm still using those hats because I'm really my background is Polish, despite the fact that both the communists and the Nazis took away my birthright. So we went to the station, and my mother bought tickets, and we went on the train to Warsaw without any problems because we went as Christians. We could have even looked as Germans because my mother was well dressed. She was a very beautiful woman. She was Scandinavian looking, and she was quite tall. And the two children, believe it or not, we were both good looking, and everybody kind of came up and loved to see little children, especially if they were Germanic looking or Aryan. So we went. My father, who had a little beard, who spoke Polish with a Yiddish accent because he was always studying the old, the old books, the holy books, and he spoke Yiddish most of the time. So he couldn't take the train, and he couldn't go as a Christian because he would be recognized, and he would be either shot or killed or murdered. So he smuggled himself. He walked at night, and during the day, friendly farmers, or when he saw forests, Poland is full of forests, as I told you, very flat, full of forests, he would either cover himself with leaves, or have a friendly farmer put him in a barn. And it took him about 2 to 3 months to arrive walking to Warsaw. When he arrived in Warsaw, he found a little apartment for us. By that time, there were 17 people living in my aunt's small apartment, and I used to sleep in the hall together with a cousin of mine, And it really was, and things in Warsaw were not better than in Łódź very much. When you walked out, and there were 350,000 Jews living in the GTA of Warsaw, the Greater Toronto, the Greater Warsaw area, in were 350,000 Polish citizen Jews. And they started talking about the ghetto. They didn't say it. And then they started not talking about ghetto. And the Warsaw was first governed by the army. And when the army governed Warsaw, things weren't as bad as they became later. But then the security service took over and they decided there was going to be a ghetto. So on October, the Jewish Community Council was told uh, by the Germans that they must pay for a wall and they must put up a wall around certain areas. Now, only about 2.5 or 2.8% of the Warsaw area was given to the Jews in the center of the Jewish area. And they started building the wall, which they had to pay for themselves, collect money from all the Jews, and then in November of 1939, the walls were finished and the barbed wire on top, and all the 350,000 Jews had to be pushed into this small area. 77 streets, apparently, out of 770 in the immediate middle of Warsaw. It wasn't the whole of Warsaw with its you know like little towns around it, but it was just the main Warsaw streets. 770, only 10% was given to the Jews, and it was in area about 2.5, 2.7%. So the Jewish Community Council came in, and the Germans made them create there was a Jewish police, a Jewish prison, a Jewish bank, a Jewish post office, a Jewish everything, except everything was nothing. It was only what the Nazis told you told the head of the Jewish Community Council that he could do. But they created 2,000 policemen, Jewish policemen. But at the same time, there was the Blue Police, which was the collaborationist Polish Christian police. They called them the Blue Police because of their uniforms, and they were all collaborators, and they were very bad towards the Jews, even worse than some of the Germans. Whatever, and this, and then I want to tell you some of the conditions in the Warsaw Ghetto. My father was a winemaker, and he couldn't make a living unless he did something. So he sent me out to look for bottles. Even already before the ghetto started, I would run around to all the cafes and I would collect old bottles, and he would give them to him, and I would take a rucksack and collect as many bottles as I could, and he would wash them, clean them, and he would get raisins on the black market, and he would get corks, and he set up in a little kitchen. We had a, a small apartment with the facilities which were in the hallway, and they were this was so small that it was the size of a schoolroom. Half of it was a bedroom, just the four little two beds for my parents and two little beds for the children, and then the little kitchen where my father set up two little kind of vats with linen bags, and he created. I can't tell you exactly how he did it because I don't even know. And he created a place where he would make wine, and I would continue even in the Warsaw Ghetto to go and find bottles because the collaborators, cooperators, and I don't want to judge them today. The Jewish ones, and then there was the Blue Police, the Christian Polish police, and the cooperators, collaborators, and all kinds of, and the Nazis themselves. They started a black market. And my father used to buy raisins and make wine, and I would deliver it on Fridays to Jews who could still afford to buy a bottle of wine to make Friday nights prayers to God. And this is how we made a living in the Warsaw Ghetto for quite a while. But this little boy, I was claustrophobic. I couldn't stay in this little tiny apartment. So I would be outside, either collecting bottles or just during the week running around in the streets. And I saw scenes, for example, Jewish police hitting people, arresting them, doing all kinds of things in the Warsaw Ghetto. Uh, Polish police, I always think in other languages because I speak 7 and 8 languages. So whatever comes to my mind, Granatowa Policja, which means the blue police, they would come in and they would do all kinds of terrible things. They had two sections in the Warsaw Ghetto, two commissariats and kind of stations, and they got up to many terrible things. And of course, the Nazis, you know, they had to enjoy themselves. So there were cafes in the Warsaw Ghetto. There were many cafes, and there were people who used to. I would stand outside a cafe, and I would watch inside, and I would inhale the smell of geese because geese are a big thing in Poland, like turkeys are in the United States and in Canada, and they would roast these geese and ducks and things, and the smells would come out. And I've never actually had anything like that in the Warsaw Ghetto. And then next to me, there was a body of a person who died because from the beginning of the end of 1940, beginning of 41, they gave us rations of 180 calories for everybody. Those people that were employed by German companies, they started factories inside the ghetto and outside the ghetto, and Jewish police would take people every day outside of the Warsaw Ghetto to work in non-Jewish factories, like German factories that started, like factories that exist to this day, Volkswagen and BMW and all these factories, they started under different names, but they were there. And those people got a few hundred calories more, and some things for their families to have. And this went on and on. And in the meantime, because of the crowding, and then they used to bring in people from the surrounding areas, and by the time towards the end of 1941, there were close to 450 to half a million people living. They also brought people from Germany, from other countries. And you can imagine what kind of there were 10 people to a room, 20 people to a room. There were you couldn't really exist because the disease and the crowding and the hunger, more than close to 100,000 people died in the Warsaw Ghetto between 1941 and 1942, July 42. And this little boy saw all these things going around. The Jewish Community Council had a burial society that used to round with wooden carts, and they would collect the dead bodies like you collect garbage in the streets. And then they would take them to a big pit into the Jewish cemetery and just throw them in on just like you collect rubbish. And it was really very, very difficult. People, started selling everything they had, and thank God for the black market, including the Nazis created. So first they sold their jewelry, and then they sold their clothing, then they sold their bedding, and then they sold whatever they could find, because Polish Christians would come in with all kinds of food, and the Nazis would actually smuggle in busloads of food to make a living, to create them for themselves wonderful conditions and enrich themselves. So these security services who were punishing us at the same time were enriching themselves, and they were enjoying themselves. But this all went on until 1942, to be exact, on the 22nd of July 1942. But in the meantime, we weren't allowed to do anything. No schools, no this, no that, no other. But everything was done in the Warsaw Ghetto as resistance. For example, my father found a teacher, and I went to study the holy books in a cellar with 7, 8 other little boys. And my father, as long as he had some money, he would pay this teacher, and the teacher would teach us the holy books. Then they started underground universities. They started all kinds of things. They thought that medication was being created in the Warsaw Ghetto because it was difficult to get medication on, from only on the black market, and it was very expensive. And not everybody, very few people had the means to be able to buy it. But this all stopped in 1942 on the 22nd of July. There were placards on the walls and said that because of unemployment, because of disease, because of the dying and everything else, we are going to relocate you. They didn't use the word deportation. They used relocation, every polite word. We're going to go to the east. And we're going to give you 3 kilo bread, and we're going to give you jam for the journey. You can take 15 kilos of your whatever you've got. Each person can take 15 kilos of your goods and come to the train. And a lot of people went voluntarily as volunteers because they got bread. These people were hungry, and they went, and the train would leave. They went into cattle trucks with these little windows with barbed wire, and within several weeks, we learned that in actual fact, these, and I can't explain to you because it's too complicated and it take up too much time, but we discovered in the Warsaw Ghetto, and my father believed them because I don't think he trusted the Germans for anything, because they kept on saying we're not relocating everybody, we only those that people who haven't got jobs and this and that and the other, and these can stay and those can stay and the Jewish police can stay, and they kept on kind of all the time, taking more and more people, and by the end of September, about 300,000 people were taken away out of the Warsaw Ghetto. But they weren't being taken to east, to farms or anything. They were taken to a place, we learned within a very few weeks, that they were taken to a place called Treblinka, and they were being murdered there. And my father, how he managed to do this, he was a very simple man, only studied holy books and worked all day to make wine and things like that and look after his family, his 2 children. My mother couldn't have children after the two of us. I had a twin sister called Sabina, and he hid us. So we lasted to the 19th of April 1943. By that time, from September onwards, there was a lull in deportations. So they started digging bunkers, and we lived at the corner of Nalewki and Mila. They dug the front of the building was demolished by a bomb during the war in '39, and it was never cleared out. So underneath those ruins and underneath our building, they built like a mine deep under earth, a bunker. They used to call them bunkers, and they put in electricity and water, and they put in air vents into the ruins, camouflaged air vents, so that we could breathe in there. And as soon as we learned that on the 19th of April they were coming to take everybody out, by that time there were only about 70,000 Jews left. 30,000 were officially still there because they were still factories in the Warsaw Ghetto, which officially those Jews were working for the German army. And 40,000 or 30,000, I don't know exactly figures, um, were wild Jews. And these wild Jews, my parents and my sister and I and my mother, we were amongst those wild Jews. How my father made it possible for us to be fed, I have no idea. But on the 19th of April, we went down to the bunker. After 3 weeks of fighting, we were discovered. They were burning Warsaw Ghetto down. They were going on, and then we were discovered. And through the air vents came a voice saying, if you don't come out in half an hour, we're going to throw gas bombs down. You're going to die, or we're also going to burn the building. So you're either going to go from the gas, or when you come out, it's going to be burning. So we came out. And they took us to the Umschlagplatz, the place of deportations, and we stayed there for about 36 hours. That day when they caught us, and the night, and the next, most of the next day. This was a school, an old Jewish school, and they pushed us into a schoolrooms. They had guards by the door of the schoolroom, and they pushed as many people as you could. You couldn't even lie down. You could only either stand or kneel. Or my parents stood all the time. My father had a sock with sugar and a teaspoon, and he would give my sister and I a teaspoon of sugar from time to time. They never touched it. The guards, if you gave them some jewelry, they would give you a bottle of water. And I saw my father taking my mother's wedding ring off her finger, and he went to the door and he got a bottle of water. But can you imagine what happened in that room? That for 36 hours approximately, we were there. Women, pregnant women, women with babies, women, with all kinds. You weren't allowed to go out. So everything, all ablutions were made in that room. It was like apocalyptic hell. Hell is nothing compared to what was in that room. And then we were chased into the wagons the next day. We thought, my father pushed us. They were pushing as many people as you could. My father pushed us towards the window so that we could breathe, because they pushed as many people as you could. They didn't care if people are going to be suffocated, because we were being taken to death. That's what we believed. And the train started, and we came to a place which turned out to be afterwards Lublin, and we were chased out of the wagons and started walking to a place that subsequently we found out was Majdanek. There were 5 camps there, and they pushed us into a huge area. We walked first towards it. It was very near of the town, and they started separating men from women, women with children, children on their own, and dogs and shootings. And you again, it was just worse than hell. My father must have known something, so he told me, don't tell them that you are 10 years old. Tell them that you are 16. So he took me. I was a head taller than my sister, despite the fact that we were twins, but I obviously grew quicker. So my father took me with the men, and we were standing there. And my sister was separated from my mother, and suddenly I saw her running towards my mother, because I was watching my mother, and she had this long blonde braid, and I looked at this braid, and then she was hugging my mother. And since then, my brain did something which I have been terribly upset all my life. And I forgot everything. I was born together with my sister. I've got photographic memory. I can remember all the things that I'm telling you. I can see them in front of my eyes. And yet I can't remember anything about my sister except the braid. And if you look at my book, you will see the braid, which is actually on the front of the book. And because I actually did that book in honor of my twin sister, Sabina. They chased us after everybody was taken away, and we didn't know where they were taking them. First the women and the children and everybody else, and we were standing there waiting, and it was already dusk. They chased us into a barrack. They told us to undress naked. We ran with our hand in the air naked, and then a man there with a white coat, with a stick, pushed us right, left, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left. And then he pushed me into right, and I came into a room. I saw showers in the ceiling. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm going to die. So I started saying my prayers because I knew they tried to make it to fool you all the time that you shouldn't make problems for them or try any resistance. So gas is going to come out and you're going to die because that's how they used to try and fool you until the very last minute. But in my case, water came out. And then I was chased into another barrack and I was given striped clothes, prison clothes with a striped round hat and wooden clogs. And I started looking for my father because I thought if I'm alive, my father must be alive, my mother must be alive. Everybody must be alive. And this is a place, like they did tell us, that this is one of the places where they don't kill you, they take you to work. But within a couple of days, I found out that my parents and my twin sister were murdered by the Nazis because there were gas chambers. If you went to the left, you went to a gas chamber. If you go to Majdanek today, you can actually see it because the Nazis didn't have time to demolish the gas chambers. I was there for 3 months. It was a place of terror, and terrible things were happening there. They tried, and instead of, we were like horses. Instead of using mechanical things, we were building roads and running with big pieces of rocks and being chased and hit all the time. And things were really terrible. And very little food was given. Fortunately for me, I made myself invisible. How did I do that? I There was the commander of all the different camps that were there. There were 5 camps in Majdanek, one separated by barbed wire, electrified barbed wire, and I was in Camp 4. And he wanted everything to be beautiful. So there was a garden in front of the barrack. So as soon as the appel, the roll call was finished and everybody was counted, I would lie down amongst it. And if anybody asked me, what did you do? I would say, this capo told me, or this Lagerführer told me that I must make sure that this garden is looked after, take out all the bad flowers and all kinds of other things and make it clean. I was only called twice to go and work, and I nearly lost my life. After 3 months, I was chased. I was taken to a place called Skarżysko, a factory where they actually made munitions. It started before the war by the Polish government in a forest, and it was near Radom. It was Skarżysko Kamienne, and there was a camp, 3 camps, A, B, and C. I was in Camp C, and when I arrived there, I was allocated the internal administration, like in a ghetto, was run by a Jewish council and a Jewish police, and they would take us to work and overseas. When I arrived, you were allocated to different policemen to do different work. So when I arrived, I was allocated to a policeman called Katz, and Katz was from Łódź. He knew my family. And he, because he was a policeman and he was privileged, cooperator, collaborator, don't ask me what, when things like that were going on. And he had his wife, but she was sick with TB and lying in the police barrack. And because he was, privileged and prominent, so he was allowed to have it. There were some policemen who had their wives and their children. I mean, all these administrators had absolutely fantastic conditions as far as I was concerned, and under those particular conditions, they had enough to eat and they had proper barracks with proper beds and everything else. But everybody else lived on straw. So he said, I want you to become my wife's nurse. If you look after her, I'm going to look after you. And he assigned my work in the open air instead of working inside with the acids where they made hand grenades, mines, and where you cook, and there's acids that go through your body, and you can only last for 3 months, because after 3 months there were selections every day, and if you couldn't work anymore, they would take you to the Krankenhaus, which is the place where the so-called hospital. And there, if you were there for more few days, every few days, and they didn't do it regularly because they didn't want to fool people to try and run away. Uh, they would come and they would take everybody, and they would have a place in the forest where they would have graves, and they would shoot them, because if you couldn't work, you weren't allowed to live. Our place of work was also dangerous. We used to work on the Shelnica, which was where they demolished. They used to explode old ammunition and keep the we used to dismantle the bullets into parts that had to be exploded, and the others, which had to be reused, so smelted and so forth and so on into copper. And it was dangerous, but at least you didn't inhale acids. So I lasted for quite a long time. And Kat's wife also lasted, because he could get medications, because he had money, and I don't know where all this was coming. So she lasted about 6 or 7 months. And and I existed there because with Katz's help, and friends of mine, my best friend, who was about 5 years older than me, 4 or 5 years older, whose name was Jacob, and he would. Yeah, I was a little boy. I didn't know how to organize myself, but I would help him with some food, which I would go to the back of the police barracks, and they would give me some extra food and things like that, because they knew I was working for Katz, for looking after his wife. And I lasted there until 1944. In July 1944, at the end of July, we came back from work, and we were told that we must go in front of the commander, who was going to sit in his office in front of the window and give a name. So we went all and gave my name. I gave my name. I saw him make a tick. The next day, to cut a long story short, he came and he said, those people that I'm going to call out their names, they are going to go with railway trucks to the next camp, because we are closing this camp. And we knew why, because the Russians, we could hear the guns coming. The front was coming very near us. And Cat saved my life, because we realized by the fact that he shot two people who tried. One was a prominent one, and one was the mother, and he chose the mother to go to where we were standing, because he called out the names, and my name was on his list. I was in rags with wire and paper on my feet. I didn't have shoes anymore. I used to walk with wire, despite the help that I used to get from cats. Only a little help, but it enough for me to exist. And then he shot those two, and as soon as he shot those two, uh, we started running away, because we knew now the names. We looked around at people that were with acid, people that were, you could see, were yellow from the acid, and everybody else that was in rags, and the good people were standing, people that were still healthy and everything else. So we started running away. I burrowed myself underneath a barrack. The barracks were built on stilts, so to try and hide. I didn't want to die. Then the Jewish police and the guards and all the SS with machine guns and everything, they started looking for everything. There's going to be a new roll call, and the roll call is going to choose the commander. Schultz was going to choose who was going to live and who was going to die, and he's going to do it physically. Start a roll call and so on. So all the people that were hidden, if they found somebody hidden, they would kill them on the spot. Katz found me, and he said, look, I would like to help you. He took me to the police barrack, took all my clothes off, gave me proper clothes, underwear, shirt, shoes, I mean boots, big boots, and a jacket, and a shirt, and a hat, and took lipstick from his dead wife, rubbed it into my cheeks, and he said, go out onto the roll call and hopefully with God's help, you will survive. And that's what happened. Schultz came and counted, took people, and by that time there was a ring guarded by all these SS with their machine guns and guards that were, as soon as somebody started to run away between their feet or something, they would shoot them dead. And and he came and stood in front of me, and I thought he recognized me. And for a few seconds, maybe, or maybe an eternity, that I thought he, Jakob, my best friend, stood next to me in rags like I was before. And he took him and threw him into the ring. And for many, many years, for 50 odd years, I grieved this boy. Then the next morning, we were sent to Częstochowa Ironworks, where I worked very hard from morning to night, uh, with steels. We had rations. The rations were according to how much you loaded. You had to load a wagon or two, depending, I think, what kind of a tag you had, and then you could go back to the camp and get food. This camp was a Jewish administration again, and the man that ran this camp, his name was Frankel, if I remember correctly, and he managed to organize himself in such a way that we never saw Germans aside. It was almost like being in heaven compared to what was in Skaržisko, because this man was a wonderful man. And after a few months, I was shipped to Buchenwald. From Buchenwald, I was shipped to uh, another German place, Kolditz, and there we made bazookas. You know, bazooka. It was called a Panzerfaust. A Faust this is a Faust, and they call it. And two soldiers had to shoot at a tank, but they would also lose their life because those Panzerfausts were not very reliable, and they used to kill the people when they were shooting out. And then after about 3-4 months, we were on a death march, and 1,500 people left approximately, and then only half of us arrived in Czechoslovakia, in Theresienstadt, and I was liberated on the 8th of May, um, as Alice told you. Thank you very much. I am
Thank
prepared
you.
to answer questions now or later.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Guter. I appreciate your time, and your story is so moving. And I think that everybody is very grateful for it. We can take time for a few questions, but what we'll have you do, because we want to be respectful of everybody's time, is we can have you send us questions, either Professor Brown or myself, and then we will arrange them, and get them in such a way that we can send them to you, because you have so generously offered to answer whatever questions that we have for you, and so we appreciate it. We do have one in the chat. Somebody said, "You've survived so much. How were you able to move forward and fight so hard after the deaths of your family members?"
The instinct of survival is very, very strong, and it doesn't matter um, how much uh, sorrow you go through. Somehow or other, human beings are resilient. And because a boy, I mean, I was an innocent boy. All I knew was the holy books. I knew Polish, and by that and Yiddish, and by that time I also spoke German. Being exposed to German-speaking people, and you had to do that because if a German said something to you and you didn't answer properly or immediately, then you were in big trouble. So what I actually did is I was in a cocoon. I, you know, I was I wasn't quite aware. I was aware, and I wasn't aware. I wrapped myself in a cocoon, just like a butterfly is born. But the fact is, I was too innocent to be able to just have. I had resilience because of what is instilled to me of our culture and of our religion, which was very important to me. And I actually had my bar mitzvah in Częstochowa, in that camp, which was a good camp from my point of view. At midnight, 10 men got together in a barrack other than mine, and I had my bar mitzvah because there was a man there who had a prayer book, and he had phylacteries, and he had a shawl, a talus, and they made me say the right words. He was a friend of my father. They went to yeshiva together, and he became a rabbi. He survived the war, and it's a long story how he survived the war. We met in Kolditz at the end, and and this is the reason, why some people manage to survive. First, because I wasn't, I suffered, but I didn't suffer like somebody who had a wife and lost children and lost their parents and lost everybody. And I lost a big family. My family was anything, I mean, my immediate family was small because I only had a twin sister and a father and a mother. But my my extended family, there were about 150 people, cousins and uncles and great uncles. I was at weddings in 1938 and 39 where I saw a lot of these people, and I've got one picture which I found in Israel after the war, because we had quite a lot of family that went to Palestine before the war, and they actually helped my grandfather to do with the wine business. And you can, I was at that wedding, so you can see my grandfather was so religious he wouldn't allow himself being photographed because it's not the right thing to do. So all I can see is his beard. I can see he turned around when the photographer was taking the photo. But otherwise, I can see uncles and great uncles and cousins all there. Only two of them of that picture survived the war. One was hidden with his wife and daughter in the Christian area in Warsaw by holy Christian people who saved their lives. And so three of them were saved by them. And two of them, a cousin of mine, Shifra, my uncle, my father had one brother, Uncle Zalman's daughter. She was married in 39. I was at her wedding. She had a child in the Warsaw, in the Lodz ghetto, and she survived Auschwitz. And Leibel Lipsker, my father's sister, second sister. And so that only two of those survived, and they're all in that picture. So this is how I survived, just because of this bubble that I put myself in.
Yeah. Yeah, and you say that other people lost more, but you lost everybody, important to you as well. And so don't I obviously I know you don't really downplay that, but still um you lost everybody as well. So this is kind of a good place to end, and it's a lot of people are asking the same type of question and in various ways. And so I think this will be a good ending question. But what message do you have for people in Tennessee, for young people in Tennessee, especially as we start seeing anti-Semitism increasing? What are some things that maybe we should keep in mind as our message moving forward?
I have a torch. my torch is slightly different to the one that you see an Olympic torch. You know, Olympic torch is is a torch of goodwill, that athletes should compete correctly. They shouldn't fight. They should be, competing according to the rules, and there should be goodwill amongst them. And it has got one flame. My torch has got 5 flames. It's got more than 5 flames. It's got lots of flames, but I would like just to tell you the first 5 flames. And the reason why I'm telling you that, because I'm going to give it to you as a present. So, flame number 1 is no religious discrimination, no racial discrimination, no homophobia, no xenophobia, and above all, no hatred. Hatred is vicious, it's pernicious, it creates vengeful feelings amongst people. It is impossible to live with vengeance. And so please, no, above all everything, no hate. And most Holocaust survivors tell you this. They educate young people, including me. They please don't hate anybody. Treat everybody as an equal. Treat yourself, treat them as if you treat yourself. I want you to give that torch, the torch of graciousness, the torch of goodwill, the torch of beauty, and the flames should be spread those flames of goodwill, spread those flames of all these different not to, and give them to everybody, give them to your families, give them to everybody that has it, and light up the world and let the world be a better place. I think the only way you can do that is if we are going to educate our young people more and more and more to not just tolerate, but to accept every person as they are. It doesn't really matter whether you have a cross, whether you have a crescent, whether you have a Star of David, whether you are a Confucius, or if you are a Buddhist. We are individual human beings. There's only one God, I believe. And God gave us free will. So why don't we use this free will to create a world which we are all equal and we are all the same and we all have the same strives. We are born, we want to live happily amongst our families and enjoy ourselves and live like human beings. I mean, that is what human beings are supposed to be doing, but not killing each other and not murdering each other. And specifically, hate is the one that creates all those conditions. So let's endeavor to make hate disappear from our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a really great message to leave on. There are a few other questions in the chat, and Professor Brown and I will make sure that we get them to Mr. Guter, and make sure that those get answered. We'll also make sure that our emails are in the video that gets sent out to those who registered for the program, so that we can get you those answers. We appreciate your time so much. Thank you, and your story. It's so profound, and thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for attending.